Very good. And we are live. So I would like to welcome everyone to what we're calling an expert webinar. It's actually going to be more or less a fireside chat. Why your company needs a chief data officer. We have Vijay Rajandram. Dr. Rajandram is the CDO of LiveCore, a Blackstone company, and a noted expert author in the field. And he founded the startup Data That Matters more than 20 years. Business and product development globally, using data analytics, using AI and ML to digital transformation for companies in full spectrum from the Fortune 500 to startups. And he is an expert at combining new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning with data governance to create significant and meaningful organizational transformations. So we're very lucky to have him here today. And the reason we've invited him is because, as I will tell you toward the end of the session, Simplilearn is putting together a Chief Data Officer certification program with Imperial College of London. So we'll talk about that just a bit at the very end. But what we'd like to talk most about is what Vijay has to offer us. I'm going to run a quick poll so that he has an appreciation for who's in our audience today. I'd just like you to take a moment to answer, what is your current job role? And we also ask how you're feeling today. It's something we've been asking throughout the pandemic as lockdowns and surges and relaxations and work from home have all disrupted our lives. Just want to get a feeling for how people are holding up. So we have about 10 seconds left on the poll. And I will share with you the poll result. So we have a few people at the CXO level, some managers, some data professionals, and then a whole lot of people in other job categories. So talking, I think, towards people who are interested in what is a CDO and whether that's a path for them personally. So let me kick off the conversation with you, Vijay. First off, tell us a little bit more about yourself that I didn't cover in the introduction.
Thank you, Stuart. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming in fine.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. I think, Stuart, you did a beautiful introduction there, so nothing hugely to add. I think the only thing I'd say is, my career in data has been more accidental than channeled in some way. I just fell in and loved data and just managed to be lucky enough to kind of, go through the many disciplines within data itself. So nothing much to add there.
Okay.
Shall we jump straight in?
Sure. So I think the fundamental question first is, what is a chief data officer? It sounds like it should be self-explanatory, but it really isn't, is it?
No, I think I think you're right. The abbreviations is easy. Most people will know a CDO translates to a chief data officer. But actually, there are many articles out there that really refer to the ambiguity of the role itself. I'm going to give you two that I think is fairly popular. Joe Bennett wrote an article in Gartner, stating that only 50% of CDOs are poised for success. And then there's another Harvard Business Review article by Thomas Davenport, Randy Bean, and Josh King that really reiterated the importance of defining this role clearly, to avoid these short tenures within chief data officers itself. I think the main, if you read a lot of this stuff, and actually if you go through some of the careers or talk to people in the industry, there's a lot of different inclinations you can have, right? Data is so common and it's used throughout the business. So it could mean many things and everything. And even different people recruiting for chief data officers will probably have a slightly different interpretation of what they're looking for, especially in relation to where the business maturity is. But
Mhm.
I mean, to come full circle back, a high level description of a chief data officer is really someone who helps an organization basically get right data, right time to the right person. It's as simple as that, driving actionable insights and then really kind of achieving your business outcomes through that.
That's interesting. It's reminiscent of a principle in medicine. There's something called the five rights of medication: the right drug in the right dose at the right time to the right patient, at the right delivery method. So you talk about the three rights of chief data officer duties. Um, that's a great way to organize that thought. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of people out recruiting to find chief data officers for their companies, but what motivates that? Why does a company need a chief data officer? What do the companies perceive as that need?
I think, um, data is growing at such a rapid pace, right? I think I'm going to keep the audience kind of also posting questions here. So I'd love to
Uh,
kind of think about, what the audience thinks in 2021 alone, how much data did we actually create globally, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the measurement of a zettabyte. But we've created something like 60 to 80 zettabytes of data. And actually, the funny thing is that not all of that is new data. The magnitude of copies of data is also growing at an alarming rate. And that's got a lot of impacts on the side, right? The more data disperses, it creates more data. It also creates a lot of noise. And with this noise comes difficulty to actually translate and understand that and link all the pieces together and kind of connect back and get meaningful actions out of them. So um, a chief data officer works a lot with multiple areas of the business, right? Data is going to be critical for in every function, whether you're in finance, risk management, marketing, every single function will have people who are playing with data or interpreting data and to run their business. The challenge is really kind of getting all of these areas to start working together, and how do you link up across the enterprise itself. And there's a real a juggling skill set that you kind of need to bring all of the parties together, especially in today's world where things are pretty fluid. People can go out and spin off. Technology is pretty easy and fast. You can go on the cloud, you can turn things on, and it's great that everybody's innovating at such a great pace. And because of that, we create more data. So
yeah,
it's unlike, people refer to data as the new oil. Oil depletes over time, right? But with data, the more you touch it, the more you create. So it's really important for someone who can kind of, make sense of all of this information and see how the enterprise actually, benefits from the joint knowledge.
okay. Um, so we talked about some of the ambiguities within the role of a CDO. Can you comment a little bit about what the different roles within those duties are? What hats a CEO has to wear in the course of performing those duties?
Sure. I think and on the broad scale, I would say a CDO wears, has got four dimensions, four hats on, and different. I'll cover some articles and other comments on the different hats, but I think they fall into these four categories. The first one is, you gotta be, you gotta have a good balance between what I would call a defensive strategy and an offensive strategy. And a defensive strategy is more around being your data defender for your firm, right? Whether you're talking about regulations, about data ethics, data privacy, but you're really there for your clients and your customers, and you're doing the right thing, right? Regulations and stuff comes up to kind of make sure we do the right thing, but if you're doing the right thing in the first place, so you're really playing that data defensive role. On the offensive side, you're really trying to optimize your business, drive revenue, or helping your business win more business, right? Win more clients, win more customers. And so that's one angle. And some of them, you got to get the balance right. And also it changes over time on, where you slant. The other two dimensions that a chief data officer has to juggle is between tactical and strategic initiatives. A tactical initiative could be just running your business as usual, right? It's standard business operations. You could be in the marketing department generating campaigns, to acquire new customers, right? Or prospects. That is in every department, you would have activities like that, and they need data help because you have to connect information from many different systems. And sometimes these systems don't talk to each other. So you have to try and figure out how to connect information, so clients or, things together. On the other angle, you can't be very focused on just the tactical things. You also start to think about what are the strategic things I need to put in place. Number one, to take advantage of the data that you're getting, because you're looking at things at an enterprise level. You get new opportunities, new products that you can actually develop, or new services. And even, it's quite popular now. More and more companies are actually also monetizing the data directly. So you can monetize the data by selling more and being more optimal, but you can also create lots of benchmarks that and roll up at a higher level that you can sell for other people to learn on, right? So getting the balance between tactical initiative and strategic initiatives are very, very key. Now, an important part, although that these are four dimensions, a chief data officer has got to be an excellent communicator, because you can't do them all in one go. So you got to be really good with really linking, communicating with people, and people can be anyone in your team as well as your stakeholders. And you got to balance that with the business itself, because your business operates in different business lines, different geographies. So you got to get a good handle on that. And at the same time, you have to be pretty well versed on technology, on what do you have, what are the tool sets do you have at hand, so that you can help you execute the things that you have to do. I think I'd only add two more things to that, Stuart. There's two articles, one by Thomas Davenport, Brandy Bean, who talk about 7 hats of chief data officer. It's kind of similar, but maybe in a broader grouping, and they talk about, a chief data officer plays the classic, a data architect role to a data entrepreneur role, data defender role. He becomes the leader of, all the data management and data analytics type activities in the company. And another one that I really like is Deloitte's released an article talking about the 4 phases of CDO, and they describe it as a catalyst, to a strategist, to a technologist, and an operator. And a catalyst could be, anything from innovating, change management, talent management. Strategist can be someone who's really good at focusing on value and demand. Technologies is all about architecture, solution delivery, and an operator can be all about operating performance, governance, and shared service.
Okay. So those are all I mean, that's several different models for looking at the different dimensions of a CDO, and all of them are useful. I'd like to encourage our audience to enter questions for Vijay into the Q&A box within WebEx. If you're on our streaming with YouTube or LinkedIn, you can put questions into the comments and should be able to capture some of those. And so when you mentioned strategists, you mentioned a couple of aspects. One of them is the business strategy for creating new revenue streams and attracting new customers. But what about the data strategy? What is your view on how a chief data officer takes responsibility for the management, nurturing, protection of an organization's data and understanding how it's going to be used to support the goals of that organization?
I have a simple formula that I tend to follow when trying to develop a data strategy. And really, it has three components to it, right? The first one is every strategy starts with some kind of hypothesis, a business thesis, which have, assumptions to it. That's really important to get a hold on, because whatever you develop from a data strategy or technology strategy has to kind of support that. The second component that I see is super important is what is the firm's kind of risk or change appetite? Um, the reason that's important is not everything can be done in day one. Some things will take longer than others. And that will give you a time dimension on how to build out, over time, how you're going to start to build a data-driven culture. So those two things are really helpful because you have to kind of latch on to that. It has to marry to those to then build a data strategy that you can start to structure in terms of what am I going to do to optimize the business? And optimize the business can often be tackled by mapping them to a customer lifecycle or a client lifecycle. And then another part of it could be also, businesses diversify the business, right? They're diversifying, whether it's different geography or different asset classes. You can then kind of form data groups and the capabilities to kind of support that. And out of that, you can decide on what are the services that you're going to provide or products that you're going to build. And that will inform the type of structures that you have to put in all the different practices that we have, whether it's data management and data engineers, data architects. You can kind of, flush it out, but it really has to key from the business hypothesis itself. I think the third element, which is absolutely critical for a data strategy, is a strategy is only good if you can actually execute it. So if you don't have an arm that's capable of executing the strategy, you kind of fall short very quickly. So I call it the data portfolio management. It's basically like air traffic controllers. And just to give you some of my experience throughout my 20 plus years of career in data, you will, being in the data world, you will never be short of work. That's always plenty of things to do, and you will never have enough resources to do them, because the more you open doors, the more doors that you're going to open further. It's also important to know what you shouldn't be doing or what you should park versus the things that you should focus on, right? So the data portfolio management is a really important function because you need to be able to juggle and give teams the independence to kind of work in independently. A sign of this you tend to get is sometimes you go into some firms with initiatives. For every single thing, you have to get 20, 30 people meeting together. It really starts to get you being very sluggish. At the same time, you just need to have some frameworks to keep all these different teams aligned to some framework for data. Some elements you can't go too far astray, so that you can kind of you can connect the information together. And really, the data portfolio management really should be built around, value focus, and whatever that means, and defining those success KPIs are very, very super important. It's important to understand that the markets change very quickly, right? Nobody predicted, the world that we're in over the last 2.5 years. It kind of dawned on us very quickly. So, I think that definitely needs, the need to kind of stay flexible, but at the same time, controlling the data portfolios and people doing the work, you need to kind of get some level of consistency. If it's haphazard and ad hoc, it becomes very sluggish over time, and it's really hard to kind of keep talent, right? So when you're driving business strategies, great to kind of keep the stakeholders and business leaders aligned and trying to achieve the goal. But without the people who are doing the work, and you can't keep them focused and aligned to the purpose, you're not going to be able to deliver those strategies.
Okay. We have a question from the audience, by the way, that is kind of fundamental, and it gets back to, I think, the first question I asked, which is, Nabil asked, what's the difference between a chief information officer and a chief data officer?
That's a excellent question. I think in many organizations, the chief data officer role often is started off or played by the chief information officer. That is quite common. They do wear the data hat on. They probably play more of the technologist role in there. Even the chief information officer role has been around a little bit longer than the chief data officer, so it's a little bit more mature. Even the CIO role has evolved tremendously over the last, I'd say, 15 years or so. The remit is pretty broad. So what I would say is, it's really a question of focus. The area is so broad that you kind of need people to focus on these areas, because the CIO role is very, very broad, especially when you're looking at all the application landscape, technology, all the digital solutions and stuff. Typically, a chief data officer partners a CIO very, very closely. So they complement each other. And I think when people are smaller, it's quite natural to see a CDO role start with a CIO and branch out later. It also sometimes branches out with, it's quite common to see chief data officer roles sitting within a CFO or a chief operating officer too.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is that data is the lifeblood of the organization and essential to its operations, and then you have to decide who really is the CXO and responsible for the operation of the company. Does the CDO report to the chief operating officer because it's an operational issue, or the chief financial officer because the financial officer is responsible for all of the compilation of data into the financial status of the company, or the chief executive officer because the CDO role is important enough in that company to be on a peer with the COO and the CFO. So a lot of different
And
options.
I think that's
Go ahead.
spot on, Stuart. I mean, the thing is, data is in the intersection of so many things. And it really comes down, I would look at it as who can create the most focus to achieve the things in combination, right? So it's really important for a CDO to work with all of those above. I mean, you could question the same of what's the difference between a CIO and a chief technology officer and a chief digital officer. I think a lot of these roles are all coming up because the areas are so broad that they're trying to create focus in those specific areas. So I would worry less about what each titles mean, because people have titles, but sometimes your role might not even do anything with the title, right?
Right.
I would focus very much on partnering with the people around you and making sure that combinedly as a team you can kind of achieve and the things that you're trying to achieve together.
So when you look at what you need to build the data strategy for the company, what are the things that, what are the other components or tools or people that the CDO has to draw upon, pull into that process?
Great question. I mean, I think we touched on the first three components already. You know, having a business hypothesis, the investment thesis, I call it, the change strategy within that, understanding the risk appetite and the change appetite. We talked a little bit about the data portfolio management itself. Now, those are all very different, and different companies are in different parts of their journey. So it's really important for anyone who's thinking of a career as a chief data officer to really understand where the business actually is, because you might start and end in different places. But one area that I always kind of think that you can get ahead of the curve a little bit is, I call it the data 101. There are 5 important things that I often kind of think I keep it in my back pocket, and they can be applied to many different scenarios just to accelerate, you know, some of the implementation of data, and providing people options, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it's I mean, if you look at jobs right now, data engineers or data scientists, I mean, these roles are everywhere right now. You know, they, I think, repeatedly year over year, they're coming up as the number 1 to 3, you know, highest volume jobs out there, right? There's just so many of them, and it's so hard to find that. So really important to a lot of this is, you know, developing a talent strategy. Data teams, you know, maybe 20 years ago, you might find data teams a team of 4 or 5 people within a small function. You know, now you're kind of talking about 200, 400 people, you
Yeah.
know, in data organization. And really, when you have that kind of scale and the complexity, whether someone's an architect or a data governance person or a data management person, they really want to know how do they develop their careers, whether it's within their vertical, their disciplines. How do they go across? How does an engineer go across to kind of lead data products, for example? You know, um, you really have to build and think about talent strategies. You know, I think the barriers of doing this is a lot easier now. I think it's really important with, you know, a lot of the online courses right now. I mean, you guys in Simplilearn do a lot of courses, but also not only just individual courses. I think it's important to kind of create mappings of how people can advance in their careers and test out some of all of these different roles and develop over a longer term, right? So that talent strategy is really, really important. I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn about, you know, having 6 career North Stars. Learning is one of those. It's important, but it's also important to kind of give people the flexibility, right, to learn different aspects of data, um, and experience that journey. I think one thing important to teach about, you know, to teach data folks is the art of learning. 20 years ago, you know, a typical job would have, you know, a skill set in one programming languages and stuff. Nowadays, we wouldn't hire somebody who's not versatile in jumping between 2 or 3 different languages, 2 or
Right.
3 different platforms, because what we're testing for people to know is their agility to change and to adapt to change, and their ambition and willingness to learn, because technology is just moving at such a pace that you can't stick to just one thing, right? It's adaptability. I think one more thing, 2 more things really. I think on the talent strategy, you got to really think about recognition, kind of linking up that, you know, learning experience in career development to recognition. And the final thing is, you know, data people have got a lot to say, right? Building their brands out digitally, it's really useful, so that the data folks become your ambassadors of your company, you know, products and services on its own right. It's really important to think about those 6 North Stars. Um, the second one, sorry, that was a long-winded thing on talent, but
So,
talent is quite close to me because
no,
it's all about.
yeah, it's critical. I mean, the the at the fundamental level, company is basically the reason, in fact, the word company refers to the group of people that um, execute its operations and strategy. So yeah, talent is critical. So don't apologize for that.
Especially in today's market where your talent has multiple different options available because the demand is so high. So paying real attention to that is it's critical. I think the next thing I would say is, how do you organize yourself? This is a topic, it's pretty confusing sometimes on how do you structure your data teams, right? Do you structure them by vertical disciplines? Do you structure, if you're spread across multiple countries, do you have teams across multiple countries? Who do you centralize, federated or not? That is, there's no right or wrong answer, to be honest, for those. It really depends on the maturity of the business itself. But it's good to know all of the different options and the plus and minuses of those, because they can help you accelerate what you're trying to achieve. So structure is quite key. Everything can't be centralized. So it's always typically a hybrid, but it's knowing what to focus centrally versus decentralizing.
And
And I
it's
think that,
also, oh, go ahead.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Didn't mean to
No, go ahead.
interrupt, but I was going to say, you talk about structure and centralization. It does trigger the thought about um, how you have to structure data protection because of the what's called the threat surface. As more and more of the organization becomes points as sources for data, they also become points of vulnerabilities for data breaches. So um, just wanted to add that in.
Completely. I mean, I think when you look at the whole topic around data privacy, data protection, it's so different in each countries right now, right? So it's important to take in not only from an architectural view, but also from a people, just to keep up with all the things that are going on locally. I think the next thing that's really good to have is a good understanding of what's out there in terms of a modern data platform. You know, a data guy doesn't have much to do if you don't give him a modern data platform. That's his, his toolkit. And I think data platforms have come a long way in the last, 10 years. Um, there are many things out there that you can choose, a combination of different things. The flexibility is just amazing right now, how you can just turn on and off and try different things without having to plan it for 5 years and so on, right? Even from a capacity stuff. So not only talking about if you're thinking of cost savings to move to the cloud, but the flexibility is so great, right? And also you won't be able to attract great talent if you're not moving to modern data platforms, because people don't want to be joining careers and go obsolete in terms of their skill sets. I actually wrote an article about 6 things that you can think about, right, when you're thinking of a modern platform. I'll just read out the 6, but you should think cloud first. Whenever you think about choosing a platform, lead with speed and timeliness of data, because data pipelines is one of the biggest reasons, or reasons to slow down your executing ability. And when you're shopping around, make sure that you get people to demonstrate the flexibility of the product itself, right? Because people always kind of say rubbish in, rubbish out. But the reality is that you can't spend time governing everything and correcting everything before you drive insight, right? The key is sometimes you just have got limited time to make the best decision on the data that you have. Now, sometimes you can't make a mistake and it has to be super accurate, but in knowing that you can do both is really key. So, things like what can you access? Can you access the data lake directly? What are the tool sets is all really important to understand. I think the fourth thing I would say is you can't really develop data platforms anymore as a project, right? Like a one-off project that you just bolt on. You really got to think about your data platform as a product, as a welcoming product, because you're really trying to democratize data today, and you're getting the whole firm to be data scientists, right? In
Hmm.
10, 15 years time, there's going to be everybody who just knows how to code. I mean, my son at the age of 6 was already programming in Scratch and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So personalizing the experience of using your platform is super key. So if you're building something in-house, you really have to get that UX UI experience right. So someone has it shouldn't be different to them going out and buying a third-party product in terms of how they navigate your platform. The last two items are built around transparency, around risks. So I think you touched on it earlier about privacy, confidentiality, security. All of those are super key. Good to know what the platforms already have addressed that you can use. And then continuous learning, about your users. Be maniacally focused on who's using the platform where. Um, you have a lot of ML engines, at the background that tells you which tables people are using. In fact, you even have things that can tell you how to join information better when they don't have, good structured ways of joining things together.
Yeah.
So those are things that I would say from a modern data platform are super key. I think just to close out the last two items is, one is getting a good understanding of how data and business information architecture links up. So good knowledge of that is important. And I think finally, which is a huge topic, is data governance. We touched on it a little bit earlier about privacy, about confidentiality, and so on. But often it should come out in your business strategy, but often they come out more organically when you're running a company because a new regulation has kind of come out. But it's good to be on the forefront of these things. Now, if you're constantly thinking about the right thing to do by your customers, you should capture most of these things.
Um, I have a question about how someone pursues this type of career path. Does a CDO by definition have to be a a data scientist? And what are the other aspects of skills, knowledge, aptitudes that someone needs to have in order to pursue this?
Your role from a complete business path, so not from a technology kind of coder. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, if I shared my experience, my first part of my career, I was a data geek. I was geeking out with building scorecards,
Yeah.
building warehouses and stuff, and I had lots of fun with that. I do think that it's important to go through that pain just to understand some of the challenges so you can appreciate it, right? It's really important. You don't have to do it hands on to know that it's not difficult. But I think it gives you a sense of appreciation. I've also seen chief data officers coming from a program perspective, right? There's people who lead large practices, whether it's offshore practices like data capabilities. You have quite a few of these. I've seen CDOs come in from that because they're managing teams who are doing this stuff. So
Mhm.
over time, they appreciate, elements of it. And then finally, I think maybe less, but I also see some business folks, kind of moving into the CDO role, right? I think my encouragement to people is, whatever that interests you, do that, but do that well, and then expand, as you go along. I never planned to be a chief data officer. That's not what I was planning for. I was just focused on problems that I love to solve, and I just got my head down and did a really good job with most of those, and then learned the things that are complementary alongside. But one of the important things is to keep your mind focused on what is the purpose, what is the big thing that you're trying to do, rather than getting too focused on a particular tech or routine that you're trying to develop. So keep your head above to look at, the broader picture constantly.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Sankuntala who asks, it relates to the point you made about agility. Broader list of data analytics tools growing. What is the best way for a CDO to keep track and keep an overview of the state of the technology and the tools out there? Um, what what strategy do you use for keeping on top of that?
I try not to create a bottleneck just by a CDO. We really encourage everyone in the firm to kind of really expand and be close to what's kind of happening out there. And we create lots of innovation activities within our organization. So people are constantly experimenting. There's a fine balance in terms of, you doing completely innovation type POCs, or proof of concepts. But this kind of gives people career satisfaction too, to be constant. Things are changing really quickly. So I would use the organization under me to kind of drive that and I learn from the people. You can learn in so many ways, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to keep your eye open on what's happening around and constantly experimenting with new things out there.
Okay. That's always good advice, and there are also tools and courses that you can use to, when you come across a tool that you want to know more about, there's usually a course or training that you can get to familiarize yourself to whatever degree, whether you want to be just basically familiar with what it does or whether you want to become an actual practitioner using that tool. So,
I mean, I think what we tend to do is most of these areas will give people in the modern platform, right? Modern day platform. You typically have two or three already there made available for people to use, and you develop courses
mhm.
and training because you're going to be measuring adoption for most of the things that you release. So it's important, people learn. But I tend to not just restrict them to those, right? They might start with those two or three that we choose, but over time that list needs to also evolve, so you use the broader network of people to kind of keep you informed.
Right. And it gets back to your point about your history as a data geek, where if you've got people working for you who have that kind of passion for playing with data and looking at new tools for playing with it in different ways, and one of them comes to you and says, I found this really great new tool that um, here's what it can do for us that we aren't doing now, or that it's taking us 10 steps to do what this will do in two. Um, that's one of the clear pathways that organizations that find out about and adopt new tools, right?
Completely. And I think, going full circle to something I said at the beginning, right? When you take your job, it's important to know where is the business maturity of the company itself. You might be joining a huge company that's organically grown and, they're looking to cut cost. And so it's a pure cost cutting, I need to streamline all my operations and stuff. And that might be the goal, temporarily even. So in those kind of scenarios, you might find yourself more restricted to open up those. So it's really important to do your research on the companies you're joining to see, what exactly are the I mean, everybody cuts costs. Don't get me wrong. You're
Yeah.
always trying to keep your operations optimal, but you can get a gauge whether a company is in growth mode or not.
Yeah. Nabil had a question, which was, in the case of a data breach, is, what does the CDO do? And I think that boils, that you can explore, Vijay, into both what do you do in advance to protect the data against breach, and then what does the CDO and his organization do to respond to a breach?
Yeah, I think the first thing is if you're thinking about a breach when the breach has already happened, you're already in trouble before,
Yeah.
you're already in trouble, right? I think most of those things, you got to prepare for these things well in advance, way in advance. So when you're kind of even thinking of solutions, you're thinking of architecture, security is injected into every single product or services, right? You do the assessment, and not only the things that you are developing, even if you're using third parties to kind of pass on information, it is our response, it's the chief data officer's responsibility, to kind of make sure that the third party are operating in the right mannerism, right? Because you have the right agreements in place. And just because somebody else is responsible to carry out managing your customers data, it doesn't take away the accountability aspects of that. So I think the key there is make sure the assessments are done, and make sure, however perfect you think you are, you have a process developed on how to identify it and what is your mitigation response structure, right? I think developing those and making sure people are on point, to know that that is super important, is really, really key.
Excellent. I'm looking, let me see if we had a couple of questions about the articles that you mentioned, and also one question that came in about any book recommendations you might have. So can you go back to the articles you mentioned, the one in Gartner and the other by Davenport et al. Joe Bennett and Gartner. What is the title of Joe Bennett's article? Do you recall?
I believe it's the seven hats. I could all of them are on my LinkedIn profile, but we could also send out the articles afterwards to the folks. But most of
Okay.
the articles, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, they should have references to those.
And I happen to have your LinkedIn profile link here, so I'm going to put that in the chat right now for all the attendees for their reference. Reach out to you. And that's in the chat now. Be able to click on that and get right to VJ's LinkedIn page. We have one,
And if
I
it's
think,
not there, anyone's interested, we could circulate it maybe afterwards, or find a way to kind of, or reach out to me separately too.
Yeah, certainly. We send a follow-up email after these sessions, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording. And if you have other links that you want me to include, pass those to me, VJ, and I will put those into the follow-up email. Will it be hard? Lakeisha asks, is this something you mentioned people can come from other backgrounds? Is this hard for somebody who's never studied the data? How long would it take for somebody to make that kind of a career pivot?
I don't think it's hard at all. In fact, more and more companies are now, this is becoming a popular trend. Companies are actually quite open to take, people who have focused on programming skills, even without a degree. That's becoming quite an increasing trend. And you have courses that you can learn these subjects within anything from 6 months to 9 months, to learn how to code different aspects and get an overview of different areas of data. You guys, Simplilearn does a lot of those courses too.
Yep.
And so I don't think it's difficult to do, but I would say that typically when someone's looking for a data science or data engineer, if you don't have coding experience, a couple of them, the CV doesn't go much further than that, right? So I don't think it's difficult to learn. It's very logical. Like I said, my son is already learning it at the age of 6. So I think as long as you're open to learning, it's not difficult. It's actually quite logical.
Very good. I think that's pretty much takes us to the end of our conversation. And I wanted to thank you for being here, VJ. We have a couple of things that we'd like to say to our audience. So let me go ahead and put up this PowerPoint. again. First off, again, there's Vijay's LinkedIn. That's in the chat, so you can connect with him directly. And I want to thank you again for being here. Want to mention a program that Simplilearn is developing. And this program is with the Imperial College of London. It is a program that will qualify people to succeed as a chief data officer. It's an online program with online live virtual classrooms. I'm going to send out on the chat a link to a quick survey about the program to help you gauge your interest and help us gauge interest from the audience. So if you would click on that and fill in the form after we finish here in the next couple of minutes, but you can also email Pratik Patra. Pratik happens to be on the call with us, so if you'd like to introduce yourself, Pratik, and mention a little bit more about this program, please do. Unmute yourself. And I'm looking to see if, go ahead, please. We're not hearing you. I think you might need to look at your WebEx voice settings. I want to go to the WebEx audio settings and select the correct microphone and speaker. All right, I think he's having technical difficulties. So,
maybe I
Hi,
can.
Abhinav.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead,
I think
Abhinav.
Pratik is having some issues with his mic. So, firstly, I'd like to thank Vijay for this wonderful session. I think it was very insightful, and I think I'm sure the audience would also agree that this has been an extremely fruitful session, and we got to learn a lot around the responsibilities, the hats to wear, and how to strategize the various aspects related to strategizing. Your data strategy, as a chief data officer. So thank you, Vijay, for that. It was a pleasure having you here. Also, just wanted everybody to know that Simplilearn has actually partnered with Imperial College London, and we'll soon be launching a chief data and analytics officer program with them. So this would be a close to around 3 to 4 month program, wherein we would have both asynchronous sessions as well as live virtual classroom sessions delivered by Imperial faculty, and we will be touching around various aspects related to the chief data officer, the chief data officer role. So we'll be touching upon aspects like data science, uh, you know, uh, how to monetize data, how can you create data-driven digital transformation strategy, aspects related to data privacy, ethics, governance, and so on. So as Stuart mentioned, we've actually put in a link to a survey, which we would be extremely delighted if you could fill that up for us, because that would actually help us gauge what are the aspects or what are the key areas that you would want us to focus while developing this program, and so that we can create the best for everyone who's interested in it. So yeah, that's all about from my end.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Those links are in the chat, including a link to Pratik Patra's email to stay informed, and to the survey that Abhinav just spoke about. So with that, I'm going to say that we have a next webinar a week from Thursday, which is a week from tomorrow. Design Thinking for Digital Transformation with Mariam Darbegi. It's a conversation between Mariam, who is the founder of Innovation Bazaar and an expert on design thinking, and Sumya Biswas, who is Simplilearn's director of design. And it'll be a fireside chat similar to today's between two experts in design thinking. So I highly recommend that. That'll be next Thursday, March 31st. I am putting into the chat again the information about that, and you'll be able to click that link and register. So I have a lot of resources for you. We'll also be sending out follow-up emails tomorrow with a number of these links and information that Vijay had mentioned in his presentation. So we invite you to continue to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter at Simplilearn, and on LinkedIn, our company link is Simplilearn. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars. We also look forward to welcoming you into the Simplilearn learning community. And with that, we've completed our session for today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks a lot, Vijay and Stuart, for organizing this session and letting everybody understand how important the CDO role is. Thank you so much.